All right, great. Looks like we've got several folks just joined us and jumped in. Let's go ahead and get started so we can dive right in. Got several topics we want to cover today. Really appreciate you guys joining us today for a CSP's guide to understanding FedRAMP Class A certification. So again, back on the 20X path, talking about 20X and diving in. And today with us in the session, we got a few speakers. As always, my name is Chad Spears. I'm the CISO here at Infusion Points. I've always got my right-hand man, 20X SME here at Infusion Points. He's an associate FedRAMP 20X lead, Mr. Tanner Bailey. Tanner, thanks for being with us today. And
Glad
then
to be here.
also from Align today, a special guest, we have the director of the Federal Go-to-Market there at Align, and that is Matt Brugman. So Matt, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you all so much for having me. Hello, everybody. Excellent to meet you all. Very exciting topic. I'm excited to get into it here. I know it's very fresh and new, so I'm stoked.
Oh yeah. Yeah, love it, love it. And I think that the joke's on me because they asked me to kind of host the Class A uh, webinar here today, and let's just be honest, I was never an A student, especially when it come to class, and so hey, when we were talking about Class C certification and our XBU 40 certification that we received, I felt a little more at home. But now we're going to be talking about Class A and diving in. Before we do that, though, as we go through the slides, let's kind of recap. Let's have a little bit of a rehash. And so I'm going to ask Tanner, if you don't mind, jump in, tell us a little bit about 20X, why 20X was needed, and kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chad. If you've been watching our content, some of this is going to be information you already know, so we'll keep it brief. But really, the main thing with 20X is that FedRAMP noticed that there was a problem, and that problem is that FedRAMP certification authorization at that time, that process was broken. It was broken in a lot of ways. One, it took too long, it was too expensive, and then there was also a lot of what we call shadow guidance. It's what we coined here, which is basically FedRAMP had been around for a significant amount of time at that point. The baselines themselves had not seen an update or a revamp in a while, but case law started to get established that wasn't directly tied to guidance, and it was really it was experience. And the only way that you could learn about that shadow guidance is either learning about it when you got to your assessment, which already took you a long time to get there, and it was just like another step in the process that added time, added investment, or it was things that you had to learn by being involved in the industry as a 3PAL, as a CSP with multiple FedRAMP authorization boundaries, or somebody like us that helps CSPs get FedRAMP. And so FedRAMP decided, when I say FedRAMP, I mean the PMO at GSA, they decided that they wanted to make a change. So they announced FedRAMP 20X last year. I believe it was March of 25. They announced a major revamp to the entire FedRAMP process, including the requirements to transition from security controls to key security indicators, which are think KPIs, but with security as opposed to just performance. And a complete revamp on how the assessment process runs and how your continuous monitoring transitions to continuous validation of your processes. So long story short, fully revamped the FedRAMP process with the goal of making it faster time to market so that the industry could have a lot more competition. There could be a lot of smaller CSPs would have a easier time getting into the market, as well as making it easier to maintain FedRAMP while also keeping security at the core of all of it. It is a business framework, but it's at the beginning, it's a security and compliance framework to making sure that federal government gets secure public sector services to use. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So if I'm kind of, summarizing what I just heard, right? The traditional FedRAMP path, Rev 5 path, was slow, right? And it costed a whole lot of investment dollars for organizations to really start marching down that path. And so that's why the need for the change. And that's kind of what I'm hearing now. So with that, as we kind of step through the next slide here, let's talk about 20X and what 20X at a high level changed that is looking to rectify and fix those issues.
Yeah, so the best way to summarize it is if it was anything that was tedious or felt like you were repeating manually all the time, what felt like all the time, because when you do FedRAMP, you become FedRAMP. It's not something you do one time. Continuous monitoring takes over afterwards. The goal is to make as much automated as possible while also maintaining visibility. You're not automating your security in a black box, you want to be able to see what that means. So think about your documentation or your authorization package. So in the past, you had hundreds of pages of documentation, scan results, an annual assessment package that you were putting together with screenshots, attestations, evidence from your learning management system that you were always grabbing manually, or maybe a couple of things you had figured out how to grab automatically because you were doing it every year. That's where we were. That's where we felt we started to notice there were things we were grabbing every year, so we started to automate some of it. But there's a lot to it. So that package is what you would submit to the PMO on your initial authorization as well as your annual assessments. But instead, now what you're doing is you're gathering all that in machine readable formats, and you're gathering, I believe the KSI says at least 70% of your KSI validation evidence in an automated format. So they're pushing for automation everywhere. 70% is the requirement. A lot of the industry is pushing toward the high 90s, 100% from an automated standpoint, because they they got to taste how much simpler it made things, and how much visibility it gives. From a security standpoint, an annual assessment only gives you the security and compliance at that one time in the year, and then it could
Hmm.
be completely different the rest of the year. So again, yeah, automated evidence, continuous validation, machine readable proof, and your certification packages. So you're moving away from the 600-page SSP. I like SSPs as much as the next guy, which means I don't like it too much. So I'm glad to see that change, as I wrote a lot of those SSPs. But then also from a continuous assurance perspective, they're wanting to push for the agency as well as the security representatives at the CSPs themselves to get visibility into where they actually stand on a day-to-day basis. KSIs have to be run at least every 3 days, and most folks are running them daily.
Right. Yeah. So Matt, I'm gonna tag you in because I feel like this is a great opportunity here because I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this. I'm hearing the traditional way, right? Documentation, documentation, documentation. A lot of manual evidence collections,
Yeah.
and believe me, we've lived that. But you coming from the assessor, the auditor side of the house, right? Um, Talk to me about your feelings around 20x and this shift, right? Compared to what you're accustomed to with the Rev 5 model to now what we're seeing with the 20x model.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's a complete philosophical shift. I think Tanner's kind of spelled that out very well here. And like that's what I think is still sort of underestimated in the industry right now is just how big of a shift this truly is. And so we certainly feel it on our end as the 3PAO because it's not just the CSPs, the cloud service providers that are affected by this, right? It's the entire industry. And so it's the 3PAOs, it's the government as well. And so everybody's wrapping their head around this philosophical shift, which as Tanner outlined, there's so many pros to this that we're like trying to solve for problems in the past. As Tanner mentioned, it was always very chicken or the eggy, right? You had to like
Mhm.
invest so much time, energy, money to get a certain step of the way to try to get buy-in from the government to then take further steps. So it became very much like how much risk and capital, time, resources, all that sort of stuff do we want to put up front? And then furthermore, to Tanner's point, the reason that investment was larger on the front end is it was so documentation heavy.
Right.
And the assessments themselves being static assessments, that's more of what I think assessors are familiar with historically is like, especially NIST being very prescriptive, like doing it or not doing it, check, 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 right? And validating that they're doing it. That is the way that it was. And it was very point in time. We come in as a 3PAO and say, hey, you need this tremendous amount of documentation to spell out exactly how you're meeting all of these controls. And then we would go through that. Whereas 20X, again, philosophical shift for us, where we now need to have needed to move with the times and go into, okay, they're going to be moving into more of a continuous validation. Our role as the 3PAO is shifting. And we're here to sort of help set them up for success from the beginning because they're going to be automating a lot of their evidence and continuous validation going forward instead of having an assessor come in for a bunch of point in time assessments.
Right.
But our role is to still make sure that security is at the forefront, that what you're reporting on is what you think you're going to be reporting on. And so the role is still really critical, but it's absolutely shifting with the times as I think we're all needing to do here.
Yeah, so that's such a great point, and I'm gonna kind of dive in on that just a little bit. Coming back fresh from RampCon here this week, was there last week, and there is this energy behind it. However, there's been a little bit of hesitancy as well. And that's why we're trying to lead with education like this. But let me ask you this, from the advisor's perspective, has it required you to be more technical, right, in the way that
Mhm.
you're assessing these environments now? Because now I'm seeing things like automation and
Yeah.
continuous validation, like you're speaking of. So talk to me about how that's playing in.
Great question. 100%. So we have historically leaned into technology as an organization at Align. So we have our own evidence collection platform. It's called Ascend. And so for the life of it, that was just a really helpful tool for, our SOC 2, our ISO 27001, our HIPAA, our high trust clients, all of these different frameworks that we would assess against. It's just a really helpful tool for organizing and kind of communicating the evidence and mapping it and all that fun stuff for our clients, but then also for our assessors, right? It helps us
Right.
streamline our assessment process as well. So as sort of 20x was coming online and these sorts of things, we just leaned further into it. We're like, great, we've already built a platform that has a lot of these types of capabilities. So our Ascend platform, you'll see it on the FedRAMP marketplace as well. Like we went through the pilot phases, as I know InfusionPoints did as well. So
Mhm.
we continue to lean into it. And I think to your point, that's going to be really critical as organizations start to explore 20x, is like which 3PAOs are really adept and leaning into that sort of
Mm.
more technical side of things. And that's why I feel very fortunate that historically we had set ourselves up really well with our Ascend platform, so that now we're taking it through, the classes of FedRAMP as well. And so that's going to be able to not just meet, but then actually exceed and help organizations as they start to go through this.
Yeah, and I wanna touch on that a little bit more because one of the things that you said right there is very important, right? It's requiring you guys to lean in a little more on the technical side. And hey, let's address the elephant in the room. We understand that when it comes to 20x, that again, there's still a little bit of hesitancy there, but at the end of the day as well, we're trying to educate and help agencies at the end of the day
Right.
understand how they can trust this. And
Hmm.
to me, one of the things that you just stated right there is so important, right? So now not only do you have these technical engineers that are building these automated evidence collections. You have this continuous validation that's happening of the environment, right? But now you have these technical assessors
Yeah.
that are reviewing that as well. So to me, from the agency's perspective, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but
Yeah.
I feel that they should have even more of an idea of the security, the true security of the
Yes.
environment, because now we got more of a technical lens looking at the overall environment from that perspective, right? Not stating that Rev 5 was not
Right.
or was
Mhm.
less secure by any means, and I think it's a great segue into where I want to take this. Out of all of the things that I heard you guys talking about, right? Traditional model, the new FedRAMP 20X model. One of the things that I didn't hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, but security didn't change in any of this. Right? It's just the way that you're presenting the data. So now I'm not taking that manual screenshot. I'm not providing you that manual 1,000-page documentation, right? So touch on that just a little bit, Tanner and Matt, both please
Yeah.
jump in. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that security still has to be there.
Yeah, yeah. I think from my perspective, leading the charge with a lot of these, security platforms that we deploy for our customers, we got into the assessments and, assessors, they would ask a lot of good questions, but there was also a lot of extra credit, I guess is the way to describe it, that we didn't
Mhm.
get credit for because it wasn't prescriptive. Matt, you mentioned that NIST is very prescriptive and you guys are, assessors are assessing against the NIST controls. So it doesn't benefit you guys to gather quote extra credit, and it really doesn't benefit the CSP to show extra credit because at the end of the day the agency is just looking for that yay, nay, is it recommended? Does the PMO recommend it? And if you're following whatever their, overlay or extra control baseline specific to that agency CISO office. But now I think that the onus on the CSP is that much stronger. So there's not necessarily more risk, but you have to prove your security much more definitively, in my opinion. Not only are you proving that there's a lot of acceptance of the NIST baseline. So a lot of the KSIs, they're clearly inspired by the NIST baseline, but there's also ways where you as a CSP might be doing something a little non-traditionally that is still secure, and you can get that extra credit And the more you want to show as much data as possible because you want to show you're as secure as possible. But the actual requirements themselves, the KSIs have actually streamlined a lot of the NIST stuff into 60 KSIs as of the latest release, which is a lot easier to kind of wrap your mind around as opposed to I think 410 was the FedRAMP high baseline last time I checked. So now, it's a lot easier to wrap your mind around it from a compliance perspective because you should know your system. You should know how you're doing those 60 things in a secure manner as opposed to just trying to check the compliance checkbox. And long story short, yeah, security hasn't really changed. You can just
Yeah.
get, I think the bar is going to continue to get raised for
Mhm.
security because I think agencies are going to look for those CSPs that are showing the most evidence, that are showing the most, um, hey, we're doing this for security, but we're also doing this, 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 and this as well.
Yeah. I
Love
think that's great because I have seen this be a little, I don't know if you guys share this perspective, others that I've talked to have, but like it's a little bit of a misnomer that kind of everybody has this idea of FedRAMP 20X just being like easy or easier in terms of security, right? And so when we talk about transitioning from and trying to solve a lot of the problems of the older FedRAMP path, it's not trying to solve or take away security. It's trying
Right.
to take away all of the sort of red tape components of it and the difficulties in the process and how much do you have to invest up front versus getting a deal with an
Mm.
agency and then being able to continue to scale with them. So I think that's where it's really important that you guys are speaking of this and calling this out, where it's like it's really important that that's the sort of difficulties that we're looking to get rid of and or just like vastly reduce. We're not looking to get rid of how secure are you, right? It does take a philosophical shift in terms of who and how is the sort of system being assessed for its security. That is
Mhm.
changing, right? Whereas before, to Tanner's point, it's like they were just looking for that thumbs up and they're like, cool, like they've gotten the thumbs up. They're on the marketplace as authorized, right?
Mhm.
That is shifting, right?
Right.
But that is required to reduce all of the other issues that we talked about. And so, regardless, you need to build your environment for this security as the first step, regardless. And then it's just looking at, okay, then what do we need to do and build on top of that in terms of proving it, whether before it was very documentation heavy and very point in time. Now it's more of a continuous validation, trust center sort of model that then others are going to be able to review.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
love
one
that.
thing I wanted to add as well, Chad, is that
Mhm.
I spoke earlier that I think agencies are going to look for the quote most secure system, but having all this information also gives agencies that are have lower priority like workloads that they not the low the LIS level workloads or even pilot workloads. They have enough visibility into the security of a system and say, hey, I don't need this uber robust secure system. I just need one that's proving what security controls they have in place because I have a pilot workload that I need to get started with. So
Right.
it assists in that risk tolerance and risk
Mhm.
acceptance conversation that is oh so important when it comes to working with an agency office. Because at the end of the day, there's always going to be some level of risk acceptance, but having the validations is a much more CSP to CSP specific way of showing, hey, this is the risk acceptance that is necessary here for us to run this system.
Yeah. Yeah, Tanner, and that's actually a perfect segue into our next slide, because you talked about that almost that pilot phase, and kind of where we're going, and I'm really excited to get on down into one of these slides here because that's exactly where we're going to land and kind of pull up and park for just a minute. But let's talk about the classes real briefly, because that is a philosophical terminology change that all of us are still trying to grab a hold of because we call it FedRAMP trauma, Matt, just because we've been in the FedRAMP game for so long. So you'll still hear me say authorized, and we'll still
Oh
say
yeah.
moderate. But Tanner, give us the high level view of how those map back and what they're being denoted as now.
Yep. So if you're signed up for the webinar today, we're going to be focused on Class A. So that's where we'll start. So FedRAMP Start has changed their definition instead of using the security levels. So low, moderate, high, and then LISS is very similar to low. You now have FedRAMP classes, Class A, B, C, D. A is going to be denoted as your pilot certifications. B is your low/LISS certifications. Uh, C is moderate, and then D is high. And the idea with each of these is not necessarily the level of security. It's the
Right.
amount of validation that you are showing as a CSP. So your Class D certifications, there's not any right now because they're getting ready to enter that pilot here towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. That is going to be the CSPs that show the most evidence, not only from
Mhm.
a KSI numbers perspective, so more KSIs than some of their counterparts potentially, but they're also showing, instead of it being just, the KSI at any given point in time, you seeing a live view of the security or the compliance. You're also seeing, over the last 6 months or over the last year inside of the trust center, you can actually check to see what has been the security of my system or this system that I'm using as an agency over the course
Mhm.
of the last 6 years. When was the last time that the MLA, monitoring, logging, and auditing KSI failed, for example? Then you can go back through a certain point in time, however long you want to retain that data. Maybe it's indefinitely, depends on what the CSP wants to do and the risk acceptance of the agency. So, end of the day, the classes are just a way for the PMO to streamline the confusion that's been seen in the industry regarding the FedRAMP designation, whether it was low, moderate, high, versus your FIPS data categorization level, which are two different things, but they started to become like, hey, I have FIPS high data, then I need a FIPS high or a FedRAMP high system. It's not really what it was meant to be at the end of the day. That's just the number of security controls that you're following. So now they're changing the nomenclature to be class specific, so you're not using terms like low, moderate, high. Think of it the same way as why they moved away from authorization to certification, because FedRAMP authorization started to get associated with the ATO, your authority to operate
Yeah.
from your agency. So now they're calling it FedRAMP certification. So it was FedRAMP authorizations at certain levels. Now it's FedRAMP certifications at certain classes.
Love it. Yeah. So at the end of the day, terminology is changing, and listen, hey, we'll all learn together, and it could
Yeah.
change next week again. But for right now, it's certification that everybody's looking to achieve, and we've got different classes that now map back to the levels. But the one that I really want us to spend some time on, so I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the next slide,
Yeah.
is Class A. And so, Matt, I'm going to lead off with you. Talk to me about Class A. Now, there are some business advantages to Class A, and I'm going to touch on those on the next slide.
Yeah.
But talk to me just at a high level. What is Class A?
Yeah. So this is great. Tanner just laid a really great foundation for anybody, again, class A, B, C, and D. And Chad, to your point earlier, I don't know how I got into class A either. You should bring me back for the class D webinar, because that's more of what I'm familiar with. But I think that this is part of that huge philosophical shift. Tanner spelled this out really nicely. I just want to hammer this home again, because pretty much everybody I talk to about this is still not in CSP's brains, that like it is a hierarchy in a sense of how much you're reporting, and it goes A, B, C, then D in terms of higher, but it's not what you would think of as low, moderate, high in terms of how secure, how many requirements you're necessarily meeting. So it takes a little bit of a
Right.
philosophical shift, where I think before, people are very used to looking at the FedRAMP marketplace and going, FedRAMP low, not as secure as FedRAMP high. You can't take that same
Mhm.
exact mentality to A versus D, for instance, right? It's really, Tanner mentioned this, it's really about like number of KSIs and type of reporting that you're doing. So I think that's a great segue into, okay, class A being the lowest or the first in those order. What is that then? Okay. So for those that have been around or have known a little bit about the historical FedRAMP, this is a great time to talk about FedRAMP Ready.
Mhm.
This is not a direct one-to-one replacement of FedRAMP Ready, but this is the closest sort of version of it. So again, as we talked about before, all sorts of problems, very chicken or the eggy about how do I get FedRAMP authorized? How do I get into that historically? FedRAMP Ready was an option where they basically said, hey, invest a lot of that time and energy and have a 3PAO come in and do a readiness assessment report, or RAR, and submit that to the FedRAMP PMO. And if you're meeting all of these base requirements, we'll get you listed on the FedRAMP marketplace as ready. Now, what did
Mhm.
that actually mean? That was really like a sales and marketing tool to go to these federal agencies and say, hey, we're ready. We just need you. And then we can go through the full assessment, and then we'll get authorized, because of that big sponsorship thing, right?
Yep.
That 20X, I don't think we've mentioned on this call, actually, I'm not sure, is doing away with, right? They have the program
Mhm.
certification. There's some nuance to that in terms of the classes, but high level, that's gone away. Okay, cool. That's what FedRAMP Ready was designed for before. How does Class A sort of replace that? Well, it really is seen as the most entry level way to get into FedRAMP and to get FedRAMP authorized. And I think the way that they've laid it out is really smart in terms of, one of the core goals that Pete Waterman and then the FedRAMP PMO stated when they've gone through, early days of, hey, we want to, change FedRAMP, we want to get rid of all these issues and red tape and blah blah blah. Ultimately, they want to make more cloud service providers available for the government to use, right? But they want to do it in a way that the security is not at a higher risk because of that, right? And so really class A and this class structure in general is designed for that, right? It's for, hey, historically a software provider that they could have never gotten or never thought of getting an agency sponsor and investing the time and the capital to go get FedRAMP moderate authorized and wait 18 to 24 months to go through all that. Now this class A process is really a good in. So what they've done is they've outlined, I know we have SOC 2 on here, they've outlined 3 frameworks, existing frameworks, and they say, hey, if you have certifications, attestations from these certain frameworks, that can be a fantastic starting point. I do want to highlight that there are some additional things, but that is a fantastic starting point and a lot of what you will end up needing to get listed on the FedRAMP marketplace as Class A certified.
Right.
So SOC 2 is one of them. We're going to highlight that. GovRAMP, for those that are familiar, and then FedRAMP as well. So if you were like FedRAMP Ready before, for instance, you didn't have a sponsor, you're still looking for that in. That is one of the frameworks that is accepted here. So I think I like how you guys spell this out here. You start from, if you have an existing framework, like say you have a SOC 2 Type 2 attestation. At A-LIGN, we're very familiar with those. We're the global leader in SOC 2 reports issued. We do a ton of these. If you have a SOC 2 Type 2, then what they're saying is that report is going to be handed into the FedRAMP PMO, but there's some additional things you need to do, right? And so I like how you
Right.
kind of spelled those out. You need to expand kind of the automation and continuous validation that maybe you're already doing it, but you're not needing to do it for SOC 2 Type 2, so you're probably not doing it.
Right.
You need to expand upon that a little bit. And then you need to kind of look at the difference in sort of, I guess this kind of speaks to that, but the reporting structure, right? So there's some FedRAMP specific requirements
Right.
you need to map to the KSIs, but ultimately that previous attestation, that previous report is what's going to be handed in along with the mapping to the KSIs at this level to FedRAMP to get your actual Class A designation. So it's I know we're going to get into the business sense a little bit later, but it's hard not to kind of wrap that in immediately to say this
Yeah.
is really a fantastic opportunity to get your foot in the door and to view the FedRAMP marketplace less as, hey, agencies, like I'm authorized, we can start working. I just went through a ton of time and money to get this, like let's work now, and more as, hey, I'm in the marketplace, I am available, let's talk. And then they can look at risk tolerance and then you can level up from there. Then, hey, maybe we can
Hmm.
go from Class A to Class B or to Class C or whatever this
Right.
agency might need to see from me if they do want to see more to work with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Matt. And by all means, let's just go ahead and jump into the business side. I mean, we've got a slide on it. We'll cover it here in just a minute, but it is such an integral part of Class A and such a huge benefit of Class A. We can go ahead and start touching on some of those things. I do want to pick up a question that I seen just pop in, and we'll throw this out there. So, Matt, right now, are they accepting? We heard SOC 2 Type 2. We heard if you were FedRAMP Ready and then GovRAMP as
GovRAMP.
well. What about ISO 27K? Have you heard anything about that? I can give you what I heard at RampCon, but wanted to hear if you know anything there.
Go for it. Well, this is, I'll throw it back to you after my answer, but for anything you want to add. But we didn't spell this out. For anybody not familiar, we're at a very interesting time right now because within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to have the final consolidated rules, right? And so what
Yep.
is that? Basically, all of these changes that we've been talking about that have been happening over the last 12 to 18 months, they're putting all of those into these consolidated rules to basically say, okay, we've had our pilot programs, we've had our requests for comment, and we've gotten a ton of feedback and a ton of comments. We've even published a preview of the rule, which I'll talk about in a second. Now we're going to put all of those into consolidated rules to basically say, here's what FedRAMP is now. Here's how you go
Yeah.
about with these new changes, yada, yada. And so we're at a very interesting state where they've said by the end of June that will be published. So that will be published any day or week now. And then So what we're operating off of right now is everything that we've learned to date, going through these pilot processes, talking with others in the industry, going through requests for comment and seeing FedRAMP's response to those, as well as the public preview of the actual rules, which is out right now, which has those three mentioned. It does not have ISO 27001 in the public preview. But Chad, I'm curious what you may have heard about heading into the full consolidated rules.
Yeah, so definitely. So Pete on stage speaking to this question was actually posed about ISO 27K, and the answer was not right now. However, they're definitely not marking it off and out of the realm of possibilities, right? They know SOC 2, so and they know that it maps closely already. So they're saying, hey, let's start here, just pretty much like we've done with everything with 20x, right? With the crawl, walk, run. And so they're going to start with SOC 2 and obviously the other two that we mentioned, GovRAMP and FedRAMP Ready. But then maybe they will come back and look at adopting ISO 27K and seeing what the diffs are there that then need to be shown for that as well. So again, they're open to it. It's just not what they're leading with right now. So great question. I appreciate you guys throwing that in the chat. But let's go back to the business aspects because this is where I'm passionate, and this is where if organizations take anything from this webinar today, this is what you need to hear. Okay, I think we're even kind of labeling this right. How to get ahead of FedRAMP 20x. Right. There's something to this Class A, and it goes back to what Matt was speaking on. This is such an opportunity for organizations out there that are looking to break into the federal market space, right? So, looking at overall why 20x exists and why it came about, it was to number one, lower the cost, speed up the time, but then also provide opportunity for other organizations to get into the marketplace and provide their service to the federal government that quite honestly, maybe they didn't have the budget or the appetite at one point to do it with the traditional Rev 5 path. Class A now is that opportunity to take your investment that you've already made because, as you just stated, Matt, your organization leads in SOC 2, certifications or working through those assessments there. There's so many individuals and organizations out there that have invested in SOC 2 already. Let's leverage that investment that you've already made and allow you to then step into the FedRAMP marketplace. But what I love about Class A and the whole 20x process is let's grow as your business grows, right? Maybe you don't have the sponsor as the old terminology lined up right now. You don't have the agency lined up yet, but you're like, hey, I need to be able to get in the marketplace so I can leverage that from a marketing perspective to then let the agency know, hey, look, we're here, we're in the game. You know about our product, you want to use our product. What do you need from us? And then the agency may come back and be like, well, we'd like to see you to Class C. Okay, well, we'll simply now step through. And that also kind of touches on another question I've just seen come in, right? As these separate or as these classes change, and Matt, you've already touched on this a little bit, does security change? Well, there might be a few more implementations or a few more things, but at the end of the day, let's remember what we stated. 20x did not change the fact that security still has to exist, right? 20x just changed in how we're presenting that data and how we're showing that. So there may be more checks, and we know that there are. There's more validations that have to be done, and there's more ways that we're showing that security. But at the end of the day, it allows the organizations to grow as the business grows, and so it's such an opportunity that I don't know that organizations fully understand that they should be looking to take advantage of, and it allows them to do it at a much lower price point as well. So Tanner, hey, what's your thoughts on this Class A path here?
Yeah, so one of the things that I want to call out that we haven't talked about is a FedRAMP Class A assessment, and that's because it's not required.
Mhm.
So we've been talking a lot about maximizing your existing investments, getting to the market faster, and I think that's a huge call out. Is Matt, you were talking about FedRAMP Ready, FedRAMP Class A kind of being the, I guess, spiritual successor to Class A as far as its function, what it serves as. And with Class A, you don't have to do like a RAR or a Class A assessment like you did for the FedRAMP Ready process. So um, this benefits those CSPs, especially CSPs that have already gone through. SOC 2 Type 2 is probably going to be more of your CSPs that have never entered the FedRAMP space or the RAMP space. When I say FedRAMP, or when I say RAMP, I mean FedRAMP, GovRAMP, etc. Um, so SOC 2 Type 2 is probably going to be the more common case for those CSPs. But for your FedRAMP or GovRAMP folks that have already been through like a GovRAMP assessment and then lost their, GovRAMP sponsor or FedRAMP that went through Ready, but they never got a sponsor, or went all the way to the end of their SAR, for example, but then they didn't get, sponsorship fell through for whatever reason. Then this provides them an opportunity to say, hey, I don't need to do anything else besides make a couple of reporting formatting changes and, probably build out like some trust center type requirements so I can report this easily to the PMO, and then the PMO reviews it quickly. Pete's even put the challenge out. Chad, I think it was a LinkedIn post that when we say Pete, everybody, we're talking about Pete Waterman, director of the FedRAMP PMO. He has been very vocal about evangelizing for 20x and everything like that. But he posted something on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, that he was basically challenging CSPs, like, hey, if you guys will get your Class A submission together, well, the PMO will have it reviewed within a couple weeks. And he was confident, and he doubled down on that in some of the in-person events that Chad and some of our leads have attended
So
as well. So
yeah, let me jump in that. So it was so funny you say that, because then the question came, well, Pete, we've heard about the fact that you may not have enough staff to do this. What happens if you get inundated with this Class A, and you're now stating that you're going to try to do it in so many weeks? Pretty much said, "Try me." He's like, "Hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it." He also stated, "Hey, listen, at the end of the day, if I need to go to the administration for more staff because of so many submissions coming in, because of this new process and the fact that we've removed red tape," he's like, "How's that a bad thing?" And so again, I love the challenge. I love the fact that we're really trying to advocate for people to, hey, follow the path that's been laid out, and leverage this opportunity. So Matt, talk to me a little bit about, let's go into this, because this is one of the things that I know I'm hearing some conflicting things, and I think viewers out there, especially organizations that are still like, all right, yeah, there's going to be some investment, but how much investment when it comes to this? Talk to me about that investment, and should this, okay, notice my word, should this lower the consulting cost from an assessor perspective? And I'm not stating that, hey, a line's going to go in and dramatically reduce pricing or anything like that. I'm not speaking that. It's more so from the
Yeah.
time perspective, right? If I'm bringing a SOC 2 type 2 to you, talk to me about that time crunch, and what that does for the overall assessment.
Yeah, no, it is. It's vastly different. I mean, yeah, don't need to like beat around the bush to say like there is less required of the 3PAO assessment for sure. Overall, I would say, right? And it's because of things like that. I would say, especially in instances where it's a SOC 2 Type 2 attestation that's already happened. And then we're really looking at more around the mapping to KSIs and things like that. To Tanner's point, though, for Class A, it is not a requirement for the 3PAO to come in, but just thinking more broadly beyond that, even. Um, it is less overall time, I think, on both ends for the CSP as well, because it's really, I think, more, maybe not more, but a different type of setup at the front so that it can continue to run from there, as opposed to, again, I just go back to the documentation piece on both ends. That involved so much time and rigor, right?
Right.
Not just for the CSPs and the advisors helping consult put them together, but for the 3PAO that's actually doing the assessment review. I mean, it's not fun reading 1,000-page SSP as much as it's not writing a 1,000-page SSP, right?
Right.
So, from that perspective, like, yeah, that makes everybody's job a lot easier if there is a different format like we're looking at now with KSIs and machine readable formats and things like that, that is different from that long piece of documentation. So yeah, I would say overall, I think it's fair to say that your equivalent, quote unquote, Tanner, I liked the spiritual successor. I might steal that. That's good. Um, your equivalent to like your FedRAMP moderate before something like your Class C, to where like, yeah, your 3PAO assessment and overall investment in that would or should be lower, because there's not as much time that we just need to comb through a lot of that documentation and the red tape to kind of get to the core of like, how's your security?
Right. Yeah. So I love that. We had another question come in, and I was just checking on that, but we've actually already touched on it, right? And so again, speaking on that sponsorship piece, Matt, you want to touch on that briefly, right? The question was, does 20x require a sponsor with this pathway?
Yeah, so the short answer, no, it does not. So there's these things called profiles now because there's the different classes. So picking the class, picking your certification path, and then Rev 5 or 20x. So that's something we hadn't touched on too much here, but
Mhm.
until the end of 2027. So the old traditional pathway, they're not shutting off overnight, right?
Right.
There's basically
Right.
what they've done with CMMC with the phased approach, if anybody's familiar with that. Kind of similar here. They're going to kind of phase out is the goal. So the now what's now being referred to as the Rev 5 pathway, the traditional pathway, that will still be an option. So if
Mhm.
you have a sponsor and you want to go down that path, that will be available through the end of 2027. But for those that choose the FedRAMP 20X pathway, there is the program certification. So that does not require a federal agency to sponsor you through the process. And that is one of the biggest, um, maybe the biggest hurdles when I was talking with clients over the years. I'm not sure
Oh,
what
yeah.
you guys saw, but like,
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. Yeah, we
yeah,
saw the sponsor being it was the chicken or the egg, depending on what your opinion is.
Yeah.
It's, if you didn't have
yeah,
this, you'd have agencies say, "Well, I need you to get FedRAMP moderate before I'm going to give you an ATO." I'm like, "Well, I need you to give me an ATO so I can get FedRAMP moderate," and
yeah,
then you basically were just feeling like you was chasing your own tail. But I did want to clarify, Matt, yeah, no sponsor absolutely required up to Class C. That
yeah,
decision has basically not been finalized yet for Class D because the pilot has not occurred yet. Considering the Class D is, it's
yeah.
still kind of in flux what that is going to look like in its final form.
Mhm.
We've seen, we can conjecture about what it's going to look like based off what we've seen in the Class B and C pilots, but
Yep.
up through Class C, absolutely no sponsor required. You can get that program certification. All that means is that FedRAMP as a program, as a body, will provide the certification to denote
Mhm.
that you have met the expectations. Pete and the rest of the PMO have made it very clear you will still need the ATO from your
Yep.
agency sponsor in order to operate within their boundary or to process their
Yes.
data. So that's not changing. You're still going to have to converse with your agency, still get an ATO. You'll still be reporting to them. It looks different in 20X, but you're still having that relationship with your AO,
Yep.
or the AO representatives. So,
Yeah, I want to call out one thing as well. Again, coming from RampCon last week, one of the things I did hear Pete say on stage, and maybe I won't be as bold in the in it here, uh, but talking about Rev 5 and 20x, and there has been a date that's been released that Rev 5 will be sunsetted. It'll be no more, right? They're not just flipping the switch. You're right, Matt. However, it has been stated this: um, look at your contracts. Your contracts probably state something along the lines that you are required to hold a FedRAMP certification within the contract. So that means that you must then behold, or you're beholden to what FedRAMP is stating. And so if that is the case, and FedRAMP is stating 20x is our pathway, you have to have a 20x class C or class D or whatever, then 20x is the path you need to be looking at, right? However, that does not mean that if you've invested dollars in Rev 5 that it's a waste. So please understand that, right? Again, security still has to be there. Um, but there is a pathway that Pete spoke on, and I would tell individuals to check with their agency sponsors, check with the PMO as well on that pathway to maybe migrate from Rev 5 if they're saying, "Hey, look, I want to migrate from Rev 5 over to 20x." See what that pathway looks like and what opportunities are going to be there for them. But to say it this way, 20x is here to stay. Okay, that was made abundantly clear, and that is the path forward. So I think it might have been stated a little bolder than that, but at the end of the day, that's the gist of it. So let's go back real quickly. We talked about the business benefits. We've talked about Class A, allowing organizations to jump in that manner. Um, but there is some homework that folks can take away if they're looking to start down this Class A pathway, right? So let's talk about some of the things that they can do now to start preparing for that. Hey, we're going to do this as an organization. We're going to invest some dollars in Class A. What are some things that we can start looking at now, especially when it comes to leveraging that SOC 2 Type 2 that maybe they already have? What do they need to start looking at? Tanner and Matt both. What are some things that are high on the list?
yeah. So, number one, I think it depends on, what is your goal with getting Class A? Is getting Class, is it, you're getting Class A because you want to evaluate or market towards the federal market, or are you getting Class A as like a first step to a already defined roadmap that you have to get up to Class B, C, whatever it looks like. Maybe you want to do D once it's finalized from the pilot, but you want to start with A. So make that decision, determine that roadmap based off your business case. Maybe you just get Class A at this time because you're, waiting for your smaller CSP, you're waiting for the more defined business case, don't have as much risk that you want to take on, or, you're not in the federal space right now, but you're looking to get into it. So make that decision first. Then if you've already decided that you're going to go towards the other frameworks, still look at Class A, leveraging your existing frameworks. And I see Gart's question in the Q&A as well. I want to get to that specifically about how to specifically target Class A. But these over on the slide, the organizations need to focus on X. These are like the major buckets that you'll need to look at, and the security processes that you'll need in place to hit a vast majority of the KSIs. Like we said, security has not changed, so infrastructure as code. Best way to build a good story around your deployment pipelines, automated configuration validation. Look at if you're in a co-locator like AWS, GCP, Azure, what cloud native services you're already using to help support that. Those have APIs. Those are a lot easier to prove. Continuous monitoring. So what monitoring things do you have in place? Or, your SIEM tool. SIEM tool is required. So do you have a SIEM tool in for security monitoring, for security logging, your identity management? What is your story around users? Machine readable evidence collection. Can you pull all this into like a JSON, for example? And then security automation. Think about how you would continuously prove this instead of just going and grabbing screenshots. So that's the high level. Basically, take all the changes in the philosophy and put it into practice. For Class A specifically, the way that you actually use that framework that you've pursued, whether it's SOC 2, FedRAMP, or GovRAMP, is there is a subset of the KSIs that have been defined by FedRAMP. We didn't list those on the slide because those are still not quite official, with consolidated rules not out so far, but there's about 20 KSIs from that 60 KSI baseline that have been called out as the Class A subset of requirements. So basically map the details of how you're meeting the FedRAMP controls or the SOC 2 Type 2 criterias or the GovRAMP controls, and you map which of those controls and your related implementations to how you would do it in the FedRAMP space, or how you're already doing things that would be required for FedRAMP. So think like security training, for example. There are SOC 2 criteria about, hiring, maintaining, and developing good talent. For example, I can't remember the SOC 2 criteria off the top of my head. There's a criteria that speaks to that, and that's going to be related to, what security training do you require? Maybe you have like certification requirements for hiring processes that you can refer to. Maybe you have should have required training in place, and that correlates directly with like your CED KSI theme, which is your cybersecurity education KSI theme. So you're basically been doing that exercise, and then also notating, like we talked about earlier, Matt. What are some of the function and operations? You have your SOC 2 processes, but what do you have to do to translate the Class A mapping into a format that FedRAMP would review to get you that Class A certification?
Yep. Yeah. So Matt, for organizations that are looking to go down this Class A pathway, do you have anything as far as homework for takeaways for them? I got a few things at the end we'll close up with.
Sure.
But in your mind, where do they need to be focusing on? What do they need to be looking at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to Tanner's point, because we can't necessarily say today, hey, this is the subset of KSIs we're going to lock in. That's for sure it. The consolidated rules will finalize that for us. I would say stay on top of that. Stay following, InfusionPoints, Tanner, Chad, myself. Stay on top of it, so that once that comes out, we can say more definitively, to Tanner's point, what you're mapping to. But look at where you're at right now, right? If you have a SOC 2 Type 2, then keep your eyes peeled for that and start looking at some of these things that we know you're going to need regardless. But if you don't, start looking at, okay, is a SOC 2 Type 2 right for me? I mean, that's definitely the lowest barrier to entry of those three frameworks: GovRAMP, FedRAMP, and SOC 2 Type 2. SOC 2 Type 2 is going to be your sort of easiest in, or your lowest barrier to entry there. So I think just look at some of these starting blocks that we know for sure right now, and then stay following on top of this, because in just like 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be able to say definitively, okay, here's exactly what we're mapping to now, and here's how to go about that.
Yeah, I love that. I think to kind of put a bow around this, that we got a few questions that are coming in. I definitely want to get to, um, but organizations really just need to be right now from a homework perspective. Um, Building that business case, number 1, figure out, okay, how far are we taking this? Or is it like Tanner stated, are we just gonna leverage this from a marketing perspective and then try to grow as the business grows? Completely understood, and I love that. But they need to be thinking about how they can take what they currently have, maybe that SOC 2, Type 2, and all of this evidence that we're talking about generating and building and bringing in. How do you make that part of your architecture and not an after deployment? To steal the quote that's on the screen here, right? It should become part of your architecture. It's not an afterthought. It's not oh, let me go pull this for you now. Build something in and think about and really start putting in your mind, how can I make this continuously proven, right? And then once I do that, to answer one of the questions that's come up here, is there a standard for the machine readable output format? Currently, right now, there's not. Come up with your own schema. However, they are speaking that they are looking to release a machine readable schema or format that they'll want that in. But right now, hey, can I get this into some type of JSON format, as Tanner mentioned? These are all things for organizations to start thinking about, but really start thinking about that business pathway first, right? Let's take that in mind. And so I think if organizations will start thinking in this manner, that'll really start preparing them for success in this area. So as we flip over
Yeah,
to key
and
takeaways,
Chad, before we
go
move
ahead, Tanner.
forward, I want to,
Yep.
answer a question in the chat.
Yeah, go
It
for it.
seems like we may have some folks that are losing the feed. For one, I believe we're still live, so everything seems to be working on our end.
Yep.
It seems like we've got a couple folks that are losing the feed, but assuming we still have everybody, I wanted to answer the hypothetical question posed by Michael Floyd. That let's say we will eventually need Class D, criminal justice data for this hypothetical question. Is it worthwhile to get started with A, B, or C? Um, you know, from my perspective, Matt, Chad, I'd love y'all's thoughts on this, but for Class A, I still think it's worthwhile going for Class A if you're going to be doing that soon, based on the fact that we haven't gone through the Class D pilot
Hmm.
at this point. So Class D pilot's not, or Class D is not an open framework at this point. So obviously you can't get it until post pilot, but I think you can position yourself well from a marketing perspective with Class A. Um, the decision to go towards Class B or C, in my opinion, is based really on the business case. If you have, other opportunities lined up that don't require, the agency doesn't require you to be at, quote, FedRAMP high or that Class D, then sure, pursue those, because at the end of the day, you'll just do an impact categorization assessment uplift with whatever additional KSIs between either Class B to D or Class C to D. But all that's going to be based on your business case. What's the revenue versus investment that you're willing to accept. Essentially, I still think Class A is especially if you're going to do it
Yeah.
soon, is definitely worth it if you're going to pursue Class D.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, I'll let you jump in, but I agree, right? It really depends. It depends on the business case. If you've got agencies lined up that are going to require that, and business is coming soon, then maybe we go ahead and start stepping into class, B, C, and land there, and then wait for D to be finalized. Uh, but again, I hate to just continue to beat that drum, but it's a business case at this point. But again, at the end of the day, security's still got to be there. So go ahead and build those security controls in. If you're just now deploying in a platform or deploying in cloud, right? Go ahead and build to that standard, but don't make the investment from the assessment perspective until needed. Matt,
Yeah, I would agree. And just to hopefully we're recording all right. I got a ping from someone that,
you are.
I think the feed has been lost, but um I would agree. I mean, I think it is very case by case still. There are some generalities that I think we can be sort of helpful with and directional with in terms of just agreeing with everything you guys mentioned, which is like if you've got an agency conversation and they're gonna need you at C or whatever that might be, let's start looking at that. Let's start going for it. I think Class A is a really good sort of stepping stone and a starting point for those that maybe they're not in those active discussions. Maybe they're not already being told, "Hey, I would personally want to see you at the C level," because I think it really is a starting point to get to those conversations, so that then you can say, "Oh, now I'm being asked to be at C, so let's move up to C." So it is very case by case. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So I appreciate that question, guys. Thanks so much for that hypothetical. And that's exactly where we want organizations thinking, right? We want them asking those types of questions, and then leverage organizations like Infusion Points or Align to help you know guide you on that business case and where you need to go. And again, grow as your business grows. That's really what I want folks to take away. So as we jump into kind of key takeaways here and start wrapping things up, at the end of the day, FedRAMP 20X, it's here to modernize this authorization or certification process through automation and that continuous validation. We all know that. There is this new certification classes, as we've already touched on, right? And it's some new terminology for all of us to learn and understand. And as we stated, hey, we'll learn together. We'll all mess up together as well because of our FedRAMP trauma and just the days of calling it authorization and low, moderate, high. And we'll continue to correct each other when we should be using the class denotation there. But with that being stated as well, Class A is such an opportunity for organizations. I hope that's one key takeaway that everybody hears. Class A, Class A, Class A. It's an opportunity for your organization if you've not been able to break into the federal market because of price point or just the level of effort that it may take for your organization, then leverage this opportunity with Class A and step into it. So leverage that investment that maybe you've already made in a SOC 2 Type 2 GovRAMP or even just that FedRAMP Ready status. And then, the success is really going to come from once you get that Class A, starting to kind of gear your mindset towards building in this automation around the environment. This something that can automatically generate the evidence for you, but then continuously prove that, continuously show that, as that's going to be a requirement of 20X. And so, to kind of sum it all up, this is the future of FedRAMP compliance. 20X is here to stay. That was heard loud and clear at RampCon this past week. And organizations that are really looking and CSPs that are looking to lean into it right now, my personal beliefs is that they're going to be the most successful in this. And so when it comes to agency adoption and helping agencies out there understand, hey, how can I trust this? It's up to organizations like ourselves and Infusion Points, Align, to lead with education. And that's what we're trying to do here at Infusion Points is lead with education to help organizations and agencies out there understand how they can trust it and why they can trust it. And in some cases, how it even maps back to the standard security practices that we're always going to preach, right? Again, the transition from Rev 5 to 20X was nothing more than then how we show and prove the data and how often we're going to show and prove the data. So, last words, Tanner, what you got?
Just a metaphor. It's kind of an odd metaphor to think about Class A because that's really our call to action is to go look at it. You are if you're think of it as you're a toothpaste company and the FDA made it so much easier to get FDA approved to get on the Walmart shelf because Walmart won't carry you unless you're FDA approved. Just think about it that way.
Love it.
You still have to you still have to prove to Walmart that you should be on their shelves. But you can actually get listed on FDA's marketplace. Just think of it that way. It's easy. Somebody, I think one of our interns actually gave me that idea sometime last summer when we were trying to figure out what all this meant, and that's been very helpful for me. Like I
Awesome.
said, weird metaphor, but it worked for me. Maybe it'll work for
It
somebody else.
works in this case. Matt,
Yeah.
last
I would
key
say
takeaways. What you got?
I would say if you are a cloud service provider, especially if that has a SOC 2 Type 2, and you have any hopes, desires of selling to the federal government one day, this is a no-brainer. Why would you not get Class A? And you can trust me because you don't even have to pay me. I am not going to come in and assess you. It is a really low barrier to entry for a lot of potential that would not be there otherwise. So I think if you got a SOC 2 Type 2 and you have any aspirations to sell into the federal government, absolutely jump on this.
Awesome. So, my last takeaway and final words here as we close it out is if you're looking to continually learn about FedRAMP 20X, follow folks like Align and Infusion Points for more information. And stay tuned for maybe some exciting announcements around Class A here at Infusion Points. So we appreciate everybody joining today. Matt, Tanner, as always, thank you guys. And we'll catch you on the next one. And y'all have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.